You know that moment when the air gets so thick with tension, you could cut it with the butter knife sitting untouched beside your plate? That suffocating feeling when everyone's smiling but their eyes are cold, when polite conversation barely masks the undercurrent of judgment flowing around the table? That was me last Easter Sunday, watching my daughter Lily sit at the wobbly card table in the corner of my mother-in-law's formal dining room, separated from the family like an unwelcome afterthought. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I never thought I'd be sitting at Eleanor Montgomery's immaculate mahogany dining table feeling like an imposter in my own family. Yet there I was, Caroline Bennett-Montgomery, 38 years old, picking at my perfectly glazed ham while stealing glances at my 16-year-old daughter as she sat with her 7-year-old cousins, her shoulders tense, her smile forced, her eyes occasionally meeting mine in silent communication. We'd been through so much together, Lily and I, more than anyone at this table could possibly understand. Eleanor had outdone herself with this Easter celebration, as she did with every family gathering. Her Victorian-style home in Oak Ridge Heights was picture-perfect, from the hand-painted Easter eggs adorning the entryway to the fresh flower arrangements with precisely trimmed lilies and tulips on every available surface. The dining room table gleamed with her grandmother's silver and the Wedgwood china that only emerged for special occasions. Everything in its place, everyone in their designated position, a perfectly orchestrated family tableau that somehow never quite had room for my daughter. "Caroline, would you pass the asparagus?" Eleanor's voice cut through my thoughts, perfectly modulated as always. Her silver blonde hair was swept into an elegant chignon, not a strand out of place despite hours in the kitchen. At 65, she still maintained the posture and poise of the former ballet dancer she was, her slender fingers now reaching for the crystal salt cellar beside my water glass. "Of course," I smiled, the expression not quite reaching my eyes, as I handed her the silver serving dish. She nodded slightly, the pearl earrings Thomas had given her for their 40th anniversary catching the light. My husband Thomas sat at the head of the table, engaged in conversation with his brother Charles about some business merger, completely oblivious to the undercurrents swirling around us. This was supposed to be a celebration, our first major holiday since moving back to Oak Ridge Heights, after Thomas accepted the position as chief surgeon at the hospital his father had helped establish decades ago. After 12 years in Boston, where Thomas had built his career, and I had established myself as a children's book illustrator, we had returned to his hometown, to family, to roots, to tradition. To give Lily the extended family connection thought she needed. What a mistake that had turned out to be. I glanced again at Lily, watching as she helped her little cousin Madison cut her ham into smaller pieces. Even relegated to the children's table, she was showing such grace. Her dark curls fell forward as she leaned down to listen to something Madison was whispering, her smile genuine for the first time since we'd arrived. My heart swelled with a familiar mixture of pride and fierce protectiveness. Lily had always been special, sensitive, perceptive, with an artist's soul that noticed everything, felt everything deeply. Those same qualities that made her extraordinary also made her vulnerable, especially in this family that valued stoicism and appearances above all else. I'd met Thomas during my final year at art school. He was completing his surgical residency, exhausted but exhilarated, dedicated to his patients and seemingly unbound by the rigid expectations that I would later learn had shaped his entire life. We fell in love quickly, intensely. When I told him about my 3-year-old daughter from a previous relationship, he didn't hesitate. "I'd like to meet her," he'd said simply. And when he did, when he sat on my apartment floor and let Lily show him her collection of painted rocks and mismatched dolls, I knew he was different from anyone I'd dated before. We married within a year, and Thomas adopted Lily when she turned 7. On paper, we became the perfect family, the successful surgeon, the artistic wife, the bright and creative daughter. I thought we were building something real, something lasting. And perhaps between the three of us, we were. But returning to Oak Ridge Heights had revealed the fault lines I'd been too naive or too hopeful to see. "I hear Lily's art was selected for the school showcase," my sister-in-law Rebecca commented, reaching for her wine glass. She was the closest thing to an ally I had in the Montgomery family, though her support was often tentative, conditional. "That's quite an honor for a new student." "Yes," I smiled, grateful for the opening. Her watercolor series on urban wildlife. She spent weeks observing the squirrels and birds in the park near our house. "How quaint," Eleanor said, her tone making the words sound like something distasteful. "Though I suppose creative pursuits are important for children to explore before they focus on more practical subjects." I felt my spine stiffen. "Lily's art isn't just a hobby, Eleanor. She's actually quite talented. Her teacher thinks she could—" "Speaking of talented," Eleanor interrupted smoothly, turning to Charles and his wife Diane. "Madison's piano recital was absolutely lovely. She has her grandmother's hands, don't you think? Those long fingers. The Montgomery musical genes showing through." And just like that, Lily's achievement was dismissed, the conversation redirected to celebrate a Montgomery bloodline trait. It was subtle, so subtle that anyone else might have missed it. But I'd been noticing these small cuts for months now. The way Eleanor would introduce Lily as Thomas's daughter, rather than her granddaughter. How family traits and traditions were discussed as if Lily had no claim to them. How her accomplishments were acknowledged but never celebrated with the same enthusiasm as her cousins. Thomas seemed oblivious to it all. Or perhaps he simply chose not to see it, having spent a lifetime conforming to his mother's expectations. Either way, his silence was becoming harder to bear. "Actually," I said, my voice a little louder than necessary, "Lily's art teacher has recommended her for a summer intensive at the Art Institute. Only 5 students from the state were selected." There was a brief pause as everyone registered my small rebellion against the conversation's natural flow. "How nice," Eleanor finally said. "Though summer is family time, isn't it? We always spend August at the lake house. Family tradition." She emphasized the word family just slightly, just enough. Before I could respond, Charles's wife Diane jumped in with an excited, "Oh, speaking of family news, we have an announcement to make." All eyes turned to her as Charles took her hand, both of them beaming. I felt a stab of foreboding. "We're expecting," Diane announced, her free hand moving to rest on her still flat stomach. "Due in November." The table erupted in exclamations and congratulations. Eleanor actually clapped her hands together like a delighted child. "The first Montgomery grandchild of the next generation," she exclaimed, her eyes shining with genuine emotion for the first time all day. "Oh, this calls for a toast." I felt as if someone had punched me in the stomach. First Montgomery grandchild? My eyes immediately sought out Lily, who had gone completely still at the children's table. She'd heard. Of course she had. The dining room wasn't that large, and everyone was speaking at full volume now, excitement canceling any pretense of indoor voices. Thomas was raising his glass, joining the toast without correction, without acknowledgement that his mother had just erased his daughter, our daughter, from the family narrative completely. Lily's eyes met mine across the room, wide and hurt at first, then narrowing slightly as something shifted in her expression. I recognized that look. It was the same one she'd had at 7 years old when a playground bully had knocked down her carefully constructed sandcastle, and she'd decided after a moment of shock that she would not cry, but would instead build something even better. I felt the moment stretch and expand, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. "Mom," Madison's little voice piped up from the children's table, "why is everyone so excited? Is it because we're getting a baby?" Diane smiled indulgently. "Yes, sweetheart. You're going to have a little brother or sister, and Grandma Eleanor." is very happy because this will be her first grandchild." And that was when Lily stood up. In her simple blue dress with the white collar, chosen carefully to meet Eleanor's standards of appropriate holiday attire, she unfolded to her full height of 5'6", seeming suddenly much older than her 16 years. Her curls were caught back with silver clips that matched her eyes, which now held a steely determination I recognized all too well. "Excuse me," she said, her voice clear and surprisingly steady. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But that's not true. The room fell silent. Eleanor's champagne glass halted midway to her lips. Charles and Diane exchanged confused glances. Thomas slowly turned in his seat to look at his daughter, his expression unreadable. "Lily," he began, his tone carrying a warning. "No, Dad," she said, not unkindly but firmly. "I need to say this." She took a deep breath and addressed the entire table. "I've been a Montgomery for 9 years now, since I was 7 years old. Since the day you adopted me and promised that I would be your daughter in every way that matters." Her voice didn't waver, but I could see the slight trembling of her hands clasped tightly in front of her. My heart raced with anxiety and fierce pride. "So I think," she continued, looking directly at Eleanor now, "that means I'm already your granddaughter, your first grandchild, even if I don't have the Montgomery nose or musical fingers or whatever genetic traits you value so much. Even if my birth certificate originally had a different last name. Even if you've never once introduced me as your granddaughter to any of your friends." Eleanor's mouth opened, then closed again, for once at a loss for words. Rebecca was staring at her plate, while Charles shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The only sound was the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway, marking each second of this unbearable tension. I wanted to stand up, to go to Lily, to protect her. But something told me this was her moment, that she needed to claim her space in this family without my intervention. "I've tried so hard," Lily continued, her voice softening slightly. "I've learned all the Montgomery family stories. I've practiced piano even though I'd rather be painting. I've sat through every family dinner listening to tales about relatives I never met but am supposed to somehow honor. I've watched you all celebrate each other while acting like I'm some sort of guest who might overstay her welcome." Thomas finally found his voice. "Lily, that's enough. You're being disrespectful." "Am I?" she asked, turning to him with eyes that suddenly brimmed with unshed tears. "Or am I just pointing out what everyone in this room already knows but pretends not to see? That in this family, I don't count. That I've never counted." The silence that followed was devastating. I couldn't bear it any longer. I pushed back my chair and stood up. "She's right," I said, my voice shaking slightly with suppressed emotion. "Every word she's saying is true, and the fact that not one of you can deny it tells me everything I need to know about this family." Eleanor recovered first, her face composed into a mask of wounded dignity. "Caroline, this is hardly the time or place for such dramatics. We're celebrating Diane and Charles's wonderful news, and Lily is making it about herself." "No," Thomas said suddenly, surprising everyone, including me. "Lily isn't making it about herself. You did that, Mother, when you called this baby your first grandchild." He stood up and moved to stand beside Lily, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Lily became my daughter, legally, emotionally, in every way that matters, 9 years ago. She became your granddaughter at the same time, whether you've chosen to acknowledge that or not." Eleanor's face flushed. "Thomas, of course I care about Lily. She's a lovely girl. But there's a difference between what, Mother?" Thomas interrupted, his voice taking on an edge I rarely heard. "Between a child you're related to by blood and one who became family through love and choice? Because if that's what you think, then you've missed the entire point of what family should be." I moved to stand on Lily's other side, the three of us now a united front against the strained silence of the dining room. In that moment, I felt something shift between us, some wound I hadn't even fully acknowledged beginning to heal, as Thomas finally, publicly, stood with us. Eleanor looked at her son, then at Lily, then at me. For the first time since I'd known her, she seemed uncertain, her perfect composure cracking just slightly around the edges. "I never meant," she began, then stopped. Something in her expression changed, softened. "Perhaps I haven't been as welcoming as I should have been." It wasn't an apology, not really, but from Eleanor Montgomery, it was the equivalent of falling to her knees in contrition. Charles cleared his throat. "Lily's right, Mom. She's been a Montgomery for 9 years. That makes her your first grandchild, not our baby." Diane nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Lily. I didn't think about how that would sound." She placed a hand on her stomach. "This little one will be lucky to have such a thoughtful older cousin." The tension in the room didn't disappear, but it transformed into something different, something with the possibility of growth rather than further harm. Lily's shoulders relaxed slightly under Thomas's hand, though her expression remained cautious, disbelieving. What happened next was something I never expected. Eleanor Montgomery, who I had never seen so much as smudge her perfect makeup, set down her champagne glass and stood up. With deliberate movements, she walked to the antique secretary desk in the corner of the dining room, unlocked a small drawer, and removed a blue velvet box. Then she walked directly to Lily. "I had planned to give you this on your 18th birthday," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "But perhaps now is a better time." She opened the box to reveal an antique silver locket engraved with the Montgomery family crest. This belonged to my grandmother, and her grandmother before her. It's traditionally given to the eldest granddaughter when she comes of age. Lily stared at the locket, then at Eleanor, her expression wary, uncertain. "You are a Montgomery, Lily," Eleanor continued, her voice gaining strength. "Whether I've properly acknowledged that or not, and I apologize for making you feel otherwise." Time seemed suspended as Lily looked at the locket, then at me, seeking guidance, or permission, or simply reassurance. I gave her the smallest nod, letting her know that whatever she decided was okay. With trembling fingers, Lily reached out and took the box. "Thank you," she said simply. She didn't rush to put on the locket or gush with gratitude, maintaining a dignity beyond her years that made my heart swell with pride. Eleanor nodded once, accepting Lily's response as sufficient. It wasn't a Hollywood moment of tearful reconciliation and instant healing. It was tentative, awkward, the first small step on what would likely be a long road. But it was a step. "Perhaps," Thomas said, breaking the silence, "we should bring another chair to the main table. There's plenty of room." And just like that, with a simple suggestion about seating arrangements, my husband acknowledged what had been true all along, that Lily belonged at the family table, not segregated with the children. Charles immediately stood and pulled over, a chair from the sideboard, placing it between Thomas and me. Lily hesitated only a moment before sitting down, her back straight, her expression still guarded but with a flicker of hope I hadn't seen since we'd moved back to Oak Ridge Heights. The conversation resumed slowly, awkwardly at first. Rebecca asked Lily about her art, and for once, actually listened to the answer. Madison abandoned the children's table to climb into her father's lap, curious about the sudden change in dynamics. Gradually, the tension eased, not disappearing entirely but transforming into something that felt, if not comfortable, at least bearable. As dessert was served, Eleanor's famous lemon chiffon cake that I had never quite managed to compliment correctly, I watched my daughter carefully. She was quiet but present, responding when spoken to, occasionally offering her own observations. The locket box remained closed beside her plate, neither rejected nor fully embraced. When Thomas reached over and squeezed her hand briefly, I saw tears glitter in her eyes before she blinked them away. In that moment, I realized how much she had needed his public acknowledgement, his willingness to stand beside her rather than smooth over difficult truths for the sake of family harmony. Later that evening, as we drove home through the winding streets of Oak Ridge Heights, the car was mostly silent. Thomas's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his profile illuminated by passing streetlights. I could see the muscle working, in his jaw, the tension still holding him rigid. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice low. "I should have said something sooner. Every time I should have said something." From the back seat, Lily's voice floated forward. "It's okay, Dad." "No, it's not," he said firmly. "But it will be. I promise you that." When we arrived home, our new old house on Maple Street with its bay windows and wraparound porch, Lily went directly to her room. I found her later sitting on her window seat, the locket open in her palm. In the dim light of her bedside lamp, I could see that it contained a tiny, ancient black and white photo of a stern-looking woman in Victorian dress. "Eleanor's grandmother," Lily said without looking up. "The one who started the Montgomery Medical Foundation. She looks like she never smiled a day in her life." I sat down beside her, careful to give her space. "Probably not in photographs, at least. It wasn't the fashion back then." Lily closed the locket with a small snap. "Do you think she meant it? Eleanor, I mean? Or was this just to smooth things over?" I considered the question carefully. "I think she meant it as much as she's capable of meaning anything that challenges her worldview. Eleanor comes from a generation and a social class that values certain things above all else. Appearances, tradition, bloodlines, that doesn't make her right, but it does make change difficult for her." Lily nodded slowly. "She still sees me as an outsider. That's not going to change overnight just because she gave me a family heirloom." "Probably not," I agreed, impressed, as always, by my daughter's perception. "But what matters more is that you're not an outsider to us, to your father and me. We're your family, Lily, no matter what anyone else thinks or says." She was quiet for a long moment, turning the locket over in her hands. "I didn't plan to say all that stuff at dinner. It just came out." "I know, sweetie, and I'm so proud of you for saying what needed to be said. That took incredible courage." "I was scared," she admitted, her voice small. "But I was also just tired. Tired of pretending I didn't notice. Tired of being grateful for scraps of acknowledgement." I put my arm around her shoulders, and this time she leaned into me, resting her head against my shoulder like she used to do when she was small. "You deserve more than scraps," I told her fiercely. "You deserve the whole feast at the main table, with no qualifications or asterisks attached to your place card." That made her smile, just a little. "Do you think things will be different now?" "I do," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "Not perfect, not right away, but different, yes. You claimed your space today, Lily. You spoke your truth. And even Eleanor Montgomery couldn't deny it." We sat there together for a while longer, watching the night deepen outside her window, the comfortable silence of two people who understand each other completely. Later, as I was about to leave, Lily called me back. "Mom?" "Yes, sweetie. Thanks for always seeing me, even when no one else did." My throat tightened with emotion. "Always," I promised. "That's what mothers do." In the weeks and months that followed, things did change. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, significant ways that accumulated like brushstrokes on a canvas, gradually forming a new picture. Eleanor began calling Lily directly, awkwardly at first but with increasing comfort, to ask about her art shows or school events. Thomas became more conscious of the subtle exclusions he had previously ignored, more willing to confront them directly rather than smooth them over. By the time Diane's baby shower rolled around in September, Lily's place in the family had shifted. Not completely, not perfectly, but meaningfully. When Eleanor introduced her to a friend as my granddaughter, the artist, I watched Lily's face light up with surprise and cautious pleasure. The locket now hung around her neck at family gatherings, not as a symbol of complete acceptance, but as a reminder of the day she had claimed her rightful place at the table and refused to be defined by others' limited vision of family. So, if you're watching this and you've ever felt like you were sitting at the wobbly card table while the real family gathered elsewhere, if you've ever swallowed your hurt to keep the peace, if you've ever wondered if speaking your truth is worth the risk, let me tell you this: it is. Always. My daughter didn't change who she was to fit into someone else's idea of family. Instead, she changed their idea of family by being exactly who she is, a girl brave enough to stand up and claim her rightful place. If this story resonates with you, please take a moment to like and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment telling me which part spoke to you most. I truly do read every single one. And don't forget to subscribe, because this is just one of many stories about finding courage, claiming space, and redefining what family really means. Until next time, remember, sometimes the greatest gift you can give to those you love is your honest, unvarnished truth, even when, especially when, it's difficult to hear. The days following Easter dinner passed in a strange suspended animation. At home, Thomas, Lily, and I moved around each other carefully, the weight of what had happened at Eleanor's dining table still heavy in the air between us. Thomas spent more time than usual in his study, claiming hospital paperwork needed attention. Lily threw herself into her art, the scratching of her charcoal against paper echoing through the house late into the night. I found myself cleaning obsessively, as if I could somehow scrub away the tension that had followed us home. Eleanor called on Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen preparing dinner when Thomas answered, his voice shifting instantly into what Lily and I privately called his Montgomery mode, slightly deeper, more formal, all traces of his usual warmth and humor carefully tucked away. "Yes, Mother," he said, pacing the hallway as he listened. "I understand. Yes, we're all fine. No, I don't think that's necessary right now." He glanced toward the kitchen where I was pretending not to eavesdrop. "Perhaps in a few weeks. Yes, I'll tell them. Goodbye, Mother." When he hung up, he stood in the doorway for a long moment, watching me chop vegetables with more force than necessary. "She wants us to come to dinner next Sunday," he said finally. "A do-over," she called it. I set down the knife. "And what did you say?" "I said we need some time." He crossed the kitchen and leaned against the counter beside me. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened. About everything, really." I waited, giving him space to find his words. Thomas had always been methodical in his thinking, carefully, examining a problem from all angles before offering his diagnosis. It was what made him an excellent surgeon. It also meant that emotional revelations came slowly, deliberately. "I failed Lily," he said at last, his voice low. "I failed you both." "Thomas." "No, let me say this." He straightened, running, a hand through his dark hair, now touched with silver at the temples. "When we decided to move back here, I told myself it was for the best. Better schools, better opportunities, family connections for Lily. But the truth is, I wanted my mother's approval. I always have. Even knowing how difficult she can be, how rigid her expectations are, some part of me has always wanted her to look at my life choices and say, 'Well done, Thomas.'" I softened, seeing the vulnerability beneath his confession. "That's natural. She's your mother. But she's not the only family that matters." His eyes met mine, serious and intent. "You and Lily are my family, my real family, the one I chose, the one I promised to protect. And I've been letting my mother's subtle disapproval chip away at that, bit by bit. From the doorway, Lily's voice surprised us both. "It's okay, Dad. I know Grandma Eleanor is complicated." She stood there in her paint-spattered overalls, a smudge of blue on her cheek, looking so much older than 16 in that moment. Thomas crossed to her immediately, pulling her into a hug that she returned after only a moment's hesitation. "It's not okay," he said firmly, "but I'm going to make it better. I promise." Over her father's shoulder, Lily's eyes met mine. There was caution there, but also hope, a fragile, tentative thing, but present nonetheless. "So are we going to dinner on Sunday?" she asked when Thomas released her. Thomas looked at me, leaving the decision in my hands. I considered everything: Eleanor's manipulation, Thomas's remorse, Lily's newfound courage. What would be best for our family, for our daughter who had already shown more backbone than many adults twice her age? Yes, I decided, but on our terms this time. The rest of the week passed in a strange new rhythm. Thomas came home early from the hospital on Thursday, something he never did, and suggested we go out for ice cream. Lily looked at him as if he'd suggested sprouting wings and flying to the moon. "Don't you have surgeries scheduled?" she asked suspiciously. "I rearranged some things," he said, shrugging as if this wasn't completely unprecedented. "The weather's perfect, and Hargrove's just started their spring flavors. What do you say?" And so we found ourselves sitting on the wrought iron chairs outside Hargrove's Creamery. Thomas with his predictable vanilla, Lily with a vivid purple lavender honey, and me with dark chocolate mint. The April sunshine was warm without being hot. The forsythia bushes lining Main Street exploding with yellow blooms that seemed almost defiantly cheerful. "I spoke with Dr. Levine at the Art Institute about your summer program," Thomas said casually, watching Lily's spoon pause halfway to her mouth. "I wanted to make sure we had all the details correct for planning purposes." Lily blinked, confusion evident on her face. "But I thought, with the lake house tradition?" "Some traditions are worth keeping," Thomas said. "Others might need re-evaluation. The program is 6 weeks, which leaves plenty of time for a lake house visit before school starts. If you want to go, that is." The smile that spread across Lily's face was like sunshine breaking through clouds. "Really? But what about Grandma Eleanor?" "Let me worry about my mother," Thomas said firmly. "This is about what's best for you, not what's most convenient for family tradition." I watched my husband and daughter discussing art supplies and dormitory arrangements, marveling at the shift that had occurred. It was as if Lily's moment of truth at Easter had not just changed how Eleanor saw her, but how Thomas saw himself. His priorities, his choices, his willingness to stand firm against the expectations that had shaped his life for so long. Later, that night, as we got ready for bed, I brought up Sunday's dinner. "Are you sure about this?" I asked, watching Thomas's reflection in the bathroom mirror as he brushed his teeth. "We could cancel, give it more time." He rinsed and turned to face me. "I'm sure. The longer we wait, the more my mother will convince herself that what happened wasn't that significant. You know how she is. She'll rewrite history until she's the reasonable one, and we're being dramatic. Better to address it now, establish new boundaries while everything is still fresh. And Lily? Do you think she's ready to face your mother again so soon?" Thomas leaned against the doorframe, his expression thoughtful. "Our daughter showed more courage at that dinner table than I've shown in 45 years of dealing with my mother. I think she's ready for anything." That was the first time I'd ever heard him refer to Lily as our daughter, without qualification or context. Just a simple statement of fact and connection. I reached up to touch his face, seeing him anew in that moment. Not just the skilled surgeon or the dutiful son, but the father who was finally, fully claiming his child. "I love you," I said simply. His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Even after I let you both down?" Especially now that you're standing up for us. Sunday arrived with an unseasonable chill, rain pattering against the windows and a gloomy gray sky that matched my mood as I stood in front of my closet, trying to decide what to wear for battle. Because that's what it felt like we were preparing. For not a family dinner, but a carefully choreographed confrontation where everything from our clothing to our timing would be scrutinized and potentially used against us. "The blue dress," Lily said from my doorway. "It makes you look strong." I turned to see her already dressed in a simple black skirt and emerald green sweater that brought out the silver flecks in her eyes. Eleanor's least favorite color, I noted with a small smile. Not a coincidence, surely. "The blue it is," I agreed. "Are you nervous?" She shrugged, coming to sit on the edge of my bed. "Not really. I mean, what's the worst that can happen? They disapprove of me? That's nothing new." Her bravado didn't quite hide the tension in her shoulders, the way she'd styled her curls into a perfect French braid, something she only did when she was feeling particularly vulnerable and wanted to appear put together. "It's okay to be nervous," I told her, sitting beside her. "I am." "Really? You never seem scared of Grandma Eleanor." I laughed at that. "Oh, I've been terrified of your grandmother since the first time I met her." She took one look at my artists, hands with paint under the nails and my vintage dress from the thrift store, and I swear she mentally calculated how quickly she could get Thomas to come to his senses and dump me. Lily smiled, but he didn't. No, he didn't, because even though it took him a long time to stand up to her, Thomas has always made his own choices when it really matters. I squeezed her hand. "And choosing you, choosing us, that really matters." When Thomas joined us downstairs 15 minutes later, I saw that he too had dressed deliberately, a casual navy sweater and khakis rather than the pressed shirts and slacks he usually wore for his mother's dinners. Another small act of rebellion, another statement about who was setting the terms today. "Ready?" he asked, car keys already in hand. I nodded, gathering my purse and the bottle of wine we'd brought as a hostess gift. As ready as we'll ever be. The drive to Eleanor's house felt longer than usual. The familiar streets of Oak Ridge Heights transformed by rain into something more somber, more significant. Beside me, Thomas drove with both hands on the wheel, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. In the back seat, Lily gazed out the window, one hand absently touching the silver locket now hanging around her neck. A deliberate choice, a visible symbol of her place in the family. When we arrived, I was surprised to see only Eleanor's car in the circular driveway. "I thought the whole family would be here," I said as Thomas pulled in behind her Mercedes. "I asked Mother to keep it small," he replied. "Just us. I didn't want Lily to have to deal with an audience." It was such a thoughtful consideration, so different from his usual deference to his mother's social planning, that I reached over and squeezed his hand in silent gratitude. Eleanor opened the door before we could ring the bell, immaculate as always in a pearl gray cashmere sweater and tailored slacks, her silver blonde hair swept into its perfect chignon. But there was something different in her expression, a hesitancy, a caution that I'd never seen before. "Thomas, Caroline, Lily," she greeted each of us with a small nod. "Please come in. Dinner's almost ready." She led us not to the formal living room where guests usually waited, but directly to the kitchen, another first. The large professional-grade space smelled of garlic and herbs, a pot simmering on the 8-burner stove that Eleanor used more skillfully than most people realized. Cooking was her one true creative outlet, the only area where she allowed herself to experiment and take genuine pleasure in the process. "I'm making ossobuco," she said, returning to the stove to stir the sauce. "I remembered it was a favorite of yours, Lily." Lily looked startled at being directly addressed, and even more surprised that Eleanor had remembered her preference. "Yes," she said cautiously. "It is. Thank you." "Can I help with anything?" I offered, more out of politeness than expectation. Eleanor never welcomed assistance in her kitchen. To my shock, she nodded. "You could dress the salad if you don't mind. The vinaigrette is in the refrigerator." Thomas and Lily exchanged a bewildered glance as I moved to comply, pulling the crystal cruet of dressing from the immaculate refrigerator. For several minutes, we worked in silence. Eleanor at the stove, me at the counter, Thomas and Lily, perched somewhat awkwardly on stools at the kitchen island, watching this unprecedented scene unfold. "I assume you've spoken with Lily about the summer art program," Eleanor said finally, breaking the silence as she transferred the osso buco to a serving platter. Thomas straightened, immediately on alert. "Yes, she's planning to attend." Eleanor nodded, not looking up from her plating. I took the liberty of calling Sarah Winters. She's on the board at the Institute. Apparently, it's quite a prestigious program. Very competitive. I tensed, waiting for the criticism, the implication, that Lily didn't really deserve the spot, that strings had been pulled. "I told her my granddaughter would be attending," Eleanor continued, surprising us all. "She's arranging a private tour of their conservation facilities. Lily mentioned last Christmas that she's interested in art restoration, and Sarah says their conservation department is one of the best in the country." Lily's mouth actually dropped open. You remembered that?" Eleanor finally looked up, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "I remember quite a lot about you, Lily. Perhaps I haven't always shown that as I should have." The tension in the room shifted, not disappearing, but transforming into something more complex, more nuanced. "Dinner's ready," Eleanor said, recovering her composure. "Shall we?" She led us not to the formal dining room with its mahogany table and Wedgwood china, but to the smaller breakfast nook off the kitchen, a cozy space with windows overlooking the garden, now shining with raindrops that caught the light from the setting sun that had finally broken through the clouds. The table was set beautifully but simply, with everyday dishes rather than the heirloom china, fresh flowers in a crystal vase, and most surprisingly, photographs arranged in the center. Old pictures I'd never seen before of Thomas as a boy, alongside newer ones that included Lily at various ages. Family photos, deliberately displayed. We took our seats somewhat hesitantly, this new version of Eleanor Montgomery throwing off all our prepared defenses and practiced responses. Thomas poured the wine while Eleanor served the osso buco, and for a few minutes, we focused on the food, complimenting the tender meat and rich sauce. It was Lily who finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Why did you invite us today, Grandma Eleanor?" she asked directly. "Is it just to pretend Easter dinner never happened?" I nearly choked on my wine, both alarmed and impressed by my daughter's directness. Thomas tensed beside me but remained silent, waiting for his mother's response. Eleanor set down her fork and folded her hands on the table, her posture perfect as always. "No, Lily. It's because Easter dinner did happen, and it needed to." She took a deep breath, visibly composing herself. "What you said, what you all said, has forced me to reconsider certain things about how I've behaved." She looked directly at Lily now, her blue eyes, so like Thomas's, clear and focused. "I have not been a good grandmother to you. I've allowed my own preconceptions about family to interfere with actually being family. That was wrong of me, and I am sorry." The words hung in the air between us, startling in their clarity and directness. Eleanor Montgomery did not apologize. Not ever. Not to anyone. Yet here she was, offering what appeared to be a genuine admission of fault. Lily set down her own fork, studying her grandmother carefully. "Why now? You've had 9 years to be my grandmother." It was blunt, perhaps even harsh, but it was the question at the heart of everything. Why had it taken a public confrontation to make Eleanor see what should have been obvious all along? Eleanor's gaze didn't waver. "Because I am stubborn and set in my ways. Because I was raised to believe that family means bloodlines and shared DNA, not legal documents or choice. And because, if I'm being completely honest, I was hurt that Thomas chose to build his family without my input or approval. She glanced at Thomas, who was watching her with an expression of disbelief. I had expectations for your life, for the kind of family you would have. When you married Caroline, when you adopted Lily, you went off script. I could have adjusted, accepted, embraced the change. Instead, I clung to my disappointment, my outdated notions of what makes a family real. You've never said any of this before, Thomas said quietly. I've never been forced to examine it before, Eleanor replied. Not until Lily stood up at that dinner and held a mirror to my behavior that I couldn't look away from. She turned. Back to Lily. You are very brave, braver than many adults I know. You spoke your truth clearly and with dignity, despite how difficult it must have been. That's a rare quality, Lily, and one to be valued. I watched my daughter absorb this praise, straightening almost imperceptibly under the weight of Eleanor's regard, not dismissive or condescending now, but genuinely respectful. So what happens now? Lily asked, still cautious. Eleanor smiled slightly. Now, we begin again. Not pretending the past didn't happen, but moving forward with better understanding. If you're willing, that is. Lily was silent for a long moment, considering. I held my breath, knowing this was her decision to make, not mine, not Thomas's. I'd like to know my grandmother, she said finally. My real grandmother, not someone who's just tolerating me because she has to. Eleanor nodded, accepting the implicit challenge in Lily's words. I would like to know my granddaughter as well. The real Lily, not the idea of a granddaughter I thought I should have. It wasn't a perfect resolution. There was too much. History, too many small wounds that would take time to fully heal. But it was a beginning, an opening, a chance for something new to grow from the difficult truth that had been spoken. As we finished dinner and moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, I watched Eleanor and Lily together, noticing how they mirrored each other unconsciously. The same tilt of the head when listening, the same precise way of holding a teacup, the same appreciation for the raspberry tart Eleanor had made for dessert. She has your eye for detail, I said quietly to Eleanor as we cleared the dessert plates, while Thomas showed Lily a first edition book he'd found in his father's study. The way she notices everything, catalogs it, remembers it later. Eleanor looked surprised, then thoughtful. Yes, I suppose she does. She glanced at Lily across the room. I always thought of her as being entirely from elsewhere, outside our family circle. I never looked for the similarities, only the differences. She's her own person, I said. But she's been a Montgomery for 9 years, even when you didn't recognize it. She's absorbed more than you know. Eleanor nodded slowly. I see that now. She hesitated, then added, Thank you, Caroline, for raising such a remarkable young woman. That's your influence, your guidance. I should have acknowledged that long ago. It was perhaps the first completely genuine compliment Eleanor had ever given me, without qualification or hidden criticism. I accepted it with a simple nod, not wanting to make more of the moment than it could bear. As we prepared to leave later that evening, Eleanor surprised us once more. She disappeared briefly into her study and returned with a large portfolio case. These belong to Richard's mother, she said, handing the case to Lily. She was quite the artist in her day, though it wasn't considered a proper pursuit for a Montgomery woman at the time. Richard saved her sketches, landscapes mostly, but some portraits as well. I thought you might like to have them. Lily accepted the portfolio with visible awe. Thank you. I'll take good care of them. I know you will, Eleanor said. Then, in a gesture completely unlike her, she leaned forward and placed a light kiss on Lily's forehead. You're a Montgomery, Lily. Never forget that. The drive home was quiet, each of us processing what had happened, the subtle but significant shift that had occurred. It wasn't a complete transformation. Eleanor would always be Eleanor, with her rigid standards and carefully controlled emotions. But something had changed. A door had opened that had previously been locked tight. When we arrived home, Lily immediately took the portfolio to the dining room table, carefully removing the aging sketches and examining them with reverent hands. Thomas and I watched from the doorway as she pored over each drawing, noting techniques, studying the artist's hand. "Grandma was right," she said without looking up. "There are portraits here too. Look, this must be Great-Grandpa Richard as a boy." She held up a charcoal sketch of a solemn-faced child with Thomas's eyes, dated 1935. It was skillfully done, capturing not just the physical features, but something of the personality behind them. A seriousness, a dignity that seemed to run through the Montgomery line. "She didn't have to give me these," Lily said, carefully returning the sketch to its tissue paper sleeve. "They're family heirlooms." "And your family," Thomas said simply. "The artist in the family, it seems." Lily looked up at that, her expression uncertain. "Do you really think she meant everything she said? About starting over? About seeing me as her real granddaughter?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "I think my mother meant it as much as she's capable of meaning anything that requires her to admit she was wrong. It won't be perfect, Lily. There will be setbacks, old habits that resurface. But yes, I believe she genuinely wants to try." Lily nodded, accepting this realistic assessment. "I'm glad I said something, even if it was scary." "So am I told her, moving to stand behind her chair, my hands resting lightly on her shoulders. "You changed something that day, Lily, not just for yourself, but for all of us." She leaned back against me, the weight of her head a familiar comfort against my chest. "Do you think there will be more family dinners like today, where we actually talk about real things instead of just making polite conversation?" "I hope so," Thomas said, joining us at the table. "I think we all need more honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, especially then." Later that night, I found Lily in her room, the locket Eleanor had given her open in her palm as she compared the tiny photograph inside to the sketches we'd brought home. "Same person," she said as I sat beside her on the bed. "Great-great-grandma Montgomery, the artist." I studied the serious face in the locket, then the confident hand that had created the sketches. Seems like creativity runs in the family after all. Lily smiled at that. I never thought I'd have anything in common with the Montgomerys. I always felt like this strange outsider they had to tolerate. And now? She closed the locket. Gently, the small click somehow definitive. "Now I think maybe I belong more than I realized, not because of DNA or bloodlines, but because of who I am, who I've become." I brushed a stray curl from her forehead. "And who is that, exactly? Who is Lily Montgomery?" Her smile widened, confidence lighting her eyes in a way I hadn't seen since before our move to Oak Ridge Heights. Someone brave enough to speak her truth. Someone who belongs at the main table, not off in the corner. Someone who's part of a family, a real family, even if it took time for everyone to see it. I hugged her then, this remarkable daughter of mine who had found the courage to claim her place in the world, to demand the respect and recognition she deserved. In standing up for herself, she had changed not just how others saw her, but how she saw herself, not as an imposter or an outsider, but as someone with the inherent right to belong. As spring bloomed fully into summer, as Lily thrived at her art program, and even Eleanor's rigid patterns began to soften around the edges, I thought often of that Easter dinner, how a moment of painful truth had ultimately led to healing, how speaking up had transformed what seemed immovable. There would be more difficult conversations, more boundaries to establish, more old wounds that needed tending. But we had begun. We had opened the door to a new kind of family relationship, one based not on obligation or appearance, but on honesty and choice. And it had all started because my daughter refused to be silenced, refused to accept less than she deserved, because she had stood up at the family table and claimed her rightful place, changing everything in the process. Summer arrived in Oak Ridge, heights with a wave of humid heat that transformed the manicured lawns and gardens into lush oases, requiring constant attention from landscaping crews. While most of Thomas's colleagues escaped to cooler vacation homes in Maine or Michigan, we remained in town. Our routines adjusted to accommodate Lily's art program and Thomas's new boundaries at the hospital, boundaries he'd never established before, like not taking calls during dinner and preserving his weekends unless a genuine emergency arose. The changes in our family extended beyond our immediate household. Every Sunday evening, Eleanor called Lily directly, no longer going through Thomas or me as intermediaries. Their conversations started awkwardly, with long pauses and careful navigation around potential triggers, but gradually developed into genuine exchanges. I would catch snippets as Lily paced the hallway, phone pressed to her ear, discussing everything from techniques for capturing light in watercolors to the historical significance of various art movements. "Grandma thinks I should focus on classical training before experimenting with more abstract forms," Lily told me one evening after hanging up. "She says that's how the masters learned." I smiled, imagining Eleanor's authoritative tone delivering this artistic advice. "And what do you think?" Lily shrugged, twirling a curl around her finger thoughtfully. "I think she's partly right, but I also think sometimes you need to break the rules to create something new." She grinned suddenly. I didn't tell her that part, not yet anyway. That "not yet" contained worlds of change, an acknowledgement that their relationship was evolving, that Lily was finding her voice not just in moments of confrontation, but in everyday conversations, learning when to adapt and when to stand firm in her own beliefs. July brought Lily's 16th birthday, traditionally a subdued affair in our household. Before the move to Oak Ridge Heights, we'd usually celebrated with a small gathering of her friends from school, pizza, and a movie, perhaps a trip to the art museum in Boston if time and finances allowed. This year, however, Eleanor called me, directly to discuss plans. "I thought perhaps we could host something at the house," she suggested, her tone carefully neutral, as if expecting resistance. Nothing extravagant, but Lily mentioned once that she's never had a proper birthday party. I was momentarily speechless, trying to recall when Lily might have shared such a thing with her grandmother. "That's very generous of you, Eleanor. It's what grandmothers do, isn't it?" she replied, a hint of vulnerability breaking. Through her usual composure. "At least, it's what they should do." And so Lily's 16th birthday became an event unlike anything we'd ever experienced. Eleanor transformed her immaculate garden into an artist's dream, with easels set up around the property for Lily and her new friends from the art program to paint the summer flowers and ancient oak trees. A professional photographer from the local paper, an old friend of Richard's, took portraits of everyone, capturing Lily's surprised delight as she blew out candles on a cake decorated with edible gold paint and sugar flowers that looked remarkably like her watercolor style. Most surprising was the gift Eleanor presented after dinner, when the golden evening light slanted through the trees and cast everything in a honeyed glow. She led Lily to the garden shed, which had been transformed into a small but exquisite studio space, complete with north-facing windows, professional-grade supplies, and a vintage drafting table that had belonged to Richard's artist mother. "For when you visit," Eleanor explained, her usual certainty faltering slightly as she watched Lily's expression. "I thought you might like a proper space to work. The light is particularly good in the mornings." Lily stood in the center of the studio, turning slowly to take everything in. The carefully arranged brushes, the expensive papers and canvases, the small collection of art books on the built-in shelves. Then she did something that shocked, Us all. She hugged Eleanor, a spontaneous, genuine embrace that made the older woman stiffen momentarily before her arms came up to return the gesture with cautious tenderness. "Thank you, Grandma," Lily whispered, loud enough for me to hear, from where I stood in the doorway. "It's perfect." Over Eleanor's shoulder, her eyes met mine, bright with unshed tears and something like vindication, the satisfaction of finally being seen and valued for who she truly was. Later that night, as we drove home with the car full of gifts and leftover cake, Thomas reached over and took my hand. "I never thought I'd see my mother hugged like that," he said quietly. "She's not. Physical affection wasn't part of my childhood." "People can change," I replied, squeezing his fingers, "when properly motivated." In the rearview mirror, I could see Lily in the back seat, the silver locket catching the passing streetlights as she dozed, exhausted from the excitement and emotion of the day. The contrast between this birthday and the tension of Easter dinner just a few months earlier was stark, almost miraculous. Not a perfect transformation. Eleanor still had moments of rigidity, of unconscious elitism that made me wince, but real progress nonetheless. August brought the traditional Montgomery retreat to the family lake house in northern Michigan, a sprawling cedar-sided structure on 3 acres of wooded shoreline that had been in the family for 4 generations. In previous years, our invitations had been perfunctory, easily declined due to Thomas's hospital schedule or other conveniently timed obligations. This year, however, Eleanor made it clear that our presence was not just expected, but genuinely desired. "The cousins have been asking about Lily," she told Thomas during one of their weekly phone calls. "And Richard would like to show her his collection of first-edition poetry books. You know how he gets when he has a willing audience for his literary interests." So, we found ourselves packing for 2 weeks at Lake Montgomery, as the family somewhat grandiosely called it. Lily alternated between excitement and anxiety, carefully selecting which art supplies to bring, which books, which music. I watched her deliberations with a mixture of pride and concern, knowing how much weight she placed on this opportunity to further solidify her place in the Montgomery lineage. "Do you think Madison and Tyler will like me?" she asked the night before our departure, referring to Charles and Diane's twins whom she'd only met at formal family gatherings. "They're only 7. What do 7-year-olds even like to do?" I smiled, folding another summer dress into her suitcase. "They like attention from cool, older cousins. They like being taken seriously and not talked down to. They like adventures and stories and feeling special." She nodded, considering this. "I could teach them to draw. Or maybe we could build a fort in the woods. Dad mentioned there's a creek on the property. We could go exploring." "All excellent ideas," I assured her. "Just be yourself, Lily. That's more than enough." The drive to Lake Montgomery took nearly 6 hours, winding through increasingly rural landscapes until we turned onto a private road canopied by ancient maples and oaks. The lake appeared suddenly through the trees, a vast expanse of blue stretching to the horizon, its surface dappled with sunlight and dotted with small boats and distant swimmers. The main house was even larger than I'd imagined from Thomas's descriptions, a rambling structure with multiple wings added over decades as the family grew, stone chimneys rising from the cedar shake roof, wide porches wrapping around 3 sides to maximize the lake views. Eleanor and Richard's blue Mercedes was already parked in the circular drive, along with Charles and Diane's SUV and Catherine's sporty convertible. "Brace yourself," Thomas murmured as we unloaded our luggage. "August at the lake house has its own peculiar set of Montgomery traditions." Before I could ask what he meant, the front door burst open and 2 small figures hurtled down the steps toward us. "Cousin Lily!" Madison shrieked, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she ran. "You're finally here. We've been waiting forever." Tyler followed close behind, more reserved than his sister, but equally intent. Did you bring art stuff? Grandma said you could teach us to paint the lake. Lily looked momentarily stunned by this enthusiastic welcome, but recovered quickly. I brought everything we need, she assured them, crouching down to their level. And I heard there's a creek perfect for exploring. Do you know where it is? Both children nodded vigorously, immediately launching into a detailed and somewhat contradictory explanation of the creek's location and the various treasures. Frogs, interesting rocks, one possible turtle they'd already discovered there. As the children chattered, the adults emerged from the house more sedately. Eleanor descended the steps with her usual grace, but there was something different about her here. A slight relaxation in her posture, her hair pulled back in a simple knot rather than her usual formal chignon, her clothing casual linen pants, and a light sweater instead of her tailored town outfits. "You made good time," she said, kissing Thomas's cheek and nodding to me before turning to Lily with a genuine smile. "I see you've already been accosted by your fan club. They've been asking every 15 minutes when you would arrive." Lily straightened, surprised. "They have?" "Indeed. They've been most insistent that their artist cousin would want to see the tree house Richard built for them last summer. Something about decorating the interior?" The twins immediately resumed their excited chatter, each grabbing one of Lily's hands and attempting to tug her toward the path that led into the woods behind the house. "Perhaps we should let Cousin Lily settle in first," Eleanor suggested, her tone gentle but firm. "There will be plenty of time for adventures after lunch." The children reluctantly released Lily's hands, but extracted a solemn promise that the treehouse would be their first expedition of the afternoon. They raced back to the house, presumably to prepare for this important event. "They've been beside themselves with excitement," Richard said, appearing in the doorway. He looked more relaxed than I'd ever seen him, his usually impeccable button-down replaced by a faded University of Michigan t-shirt, his silver hair slightly tousled by the lake breeze. "They have quite definite plans for your visit, Lily. I hope you're prepared to be thoroughly conscripted into their schemes." Lily smiled, some of her nervousness visibly melting away. "I don't mind. They seem nice." "They're monsters," Richard said with unexpected warmth. "Delightful, exhausting monsters. You'll love them." And just like that, the dynamic I'd been bracing for, the subtle exclusion, the careful politeness masking unspoken judgment, failed to materialize. Instead, we were welcomed into the casual, affectionate atmosphere of the lake house, with a naturalness that made me wonder if the formality of Oak Ridge Heights was the true aberration, a performance Eleanor and Richard maintained for the outside world. Our rooms were in the East Wing, a suite of comfortable, sun-filled spaces with views of both the lake and the woods. The decor was surprisingly informal. Wicker furniture with faded cushions, well-worn oriental rugs on hardwood floors. Bookshelves filled with paperback novels and board games with missing pieces. "My parents are different here," Thomas explained as we unpacked. "Always have been. It's the one place my mother allows herself to relax the standards a bit. Even the meals are casual. Picnics, barbecues, everyone serving themselves instead of the formal dinners she insists on in town." I shook my head, amused and slightly disoriented by this revelation. All these years, and I never knew there was a version of Eleanor who allowed mismatched towels and paperback mysteries. He smiled ruefully. "I should have brought you both here sooner. I just always assumed." He trailed off, his expression troubled. That we wouldn't fit in? That we'd somehow disrupt the Montgomery Lake House traditions? "Something like that," he admitted. "Though now it seems ridiculous. Lily fits perfectly here. Look at her." Through the window, we could see Lily already being led across the wide lawn by the twins, a sketchbook tucked under her arm, her head bent to listen to whatever important information they were imparting. She looked relaxed, natural, as if she'd been spending summers at the lake her entire life. "She adapts," I said softly. "It's what she's always done. found ways to belong wherever she is. I just wish she didn't always have to be the one adapting. Thomas wrapped his arms around me from behind, resting his chin on my shoulder as we watched Lily and the children disappear into the woods. I think this time, it's not just her. Look at my mother with the twins this morning. She was on the floor playing some complicated game involving stuffed animals and elaborate rules. The Eleanor Montgomery of Oak Ridge Heights would never sit on a floor for any reason. People contain multitudes, I murmured. Even your mother, apparently. That first day set the tone for our 2 weeks at the lake, a rhythm entirely different from our life in town. Mornings began with a simple breakfast on the screened porch, everyone drifting in as they woke rather than gathering at a predetermined time. The days unfolded with swimming, boating, reading in the shade of enormous oak trees, impromptu art lessons on the dock as Lily taught her cousins to capture the constantly changing patterns of light on water. Eleanor, to my continuing surprise, seemed genuinely at ease here. She still maintained certain standards. Beds were always properly made, meals appeared on time. The house itself remained impressively organized despite the constant traffic of sandy feet and wet swimsuits. But there was a lightness to her that I'd never witnessed before, a willingness to laugh at Charles's terrible jokes or join Catherine for early morning swims regardless of what it did to her carefully styled hair. Most remarkable was her relationship with Lily, which blossomed in this relaxed setting. I would find them together on the dock in the early evenings, Eleanor pointing out the specific quality of the sunset light while Lily sketched rapidly, trying to capture the fleeting colors, or in the library after dinner, poring over art books from the university where Richard had taught literature for 40 years before retiring. Did you know Grandma studied art history in college? Lily asked me one night as I helped her clean her brushes. Before she met Grandpa Richard, she wanted to work at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. I didn't know that, I admitted, surprised that Eleanor had shared something so personal. What happened? Lily shrugged. She met Grandpa at a gallery opening. He was already teaching at Michigan, established in Oak Ridge Heights. She said choices had different weights for women then, career or family, rarely both, especially in families like the Montgomerys. I absorbed this new information, this glimpse into the young woman Eleanor had been before she became the formidable matriarch I'd known. That explains her eye for composition. I've always thought her dinner tables were arranged like still lifes from a Dutch master. Lily laughed. That's exactly what she said you'd say. She told me you have an artist's perception, even if you don't paint, that you notice things others miss. It might have been the first compliment Eleanor had ever paid me that wasn't wrapped in a backhanded criticism. I felt an unexpected warmth toward her, a new understanding of the choices and compromises that had shaped her into the woman she became. The days passed in a pleasant blur of sunshine and water, family meals on the porch, evenings around the fire pit roasting marshmallows, while Richard told elaborate stories about local legends and mysterious lights seen across the lake on foggy nights. The children hung on his every word, but so did the adults, drawn into his natural storytelling rhythm, the precise, evocative language of a man who had spent his life studying literature. One evening, about a week into our stay, I found myself alone with Eleanor on the porch while everyone else was down at the dock for a late swim. She was knitting, another surprise, this domestic craft I'd never associated with her, while I sketched idly in one of Lily's spare notebooks, capturing the profile of the house against the deepening blue of the twilight sky. You have talent, she said suddenly, nodding toward my drawing. Lily comes by her artistic eye honestly. I looked down at my amateur sketch, seeing its flaws, but also the solid understanding of perspective and proportion that came from years of appreciating art, if not formally studying it. Thank you, though Lily's far more skilled, she's had proper training. As you might have, under different circumstances. I glanced up, startled by what sounded almost like regret in her voice. Eleanor's needles continued their rhythmic movement, her eyes on her work rather than on me. "Caroline, I owe you an apology," she said after a moment, still not looking up. "A long overdue one." I set down my pencil, giving her my full attention. "For what, specifically?" A faint smile touched her lips at my directness. "For never properly acknowledging what you've done for Thomas, for Lily, for this family." She set her knitting in her lap, finally meeting my gaze. "When Thomas first brought you home, I saw only what I perceived as your unsuitability. An artist with no family connections, no fortune, no understanding of the world Thomas had been raised in, and with a child from a previous relationship. Well, it challenged every notion I had about what his life should be." I remained silent, sensing she wasn't finished. "What I failed to see," she continued, "was the strength it took to raise a child on your own. To pursue your art while working to support yourself. To build a life that was authentic rather than merely appropriate." She picked up her knitting again, the familiar motion perhaps comforting as she ventured into uncomfortable territory. "And most of all, I failed to see how happy you made my son. How you encouraged his true self, rather than the version of Thomas that I had tried to shape." The admission hung between us in the gathering dusk, unexpected and deeply moving. It wasn't the flowery apology some might have wanted, but from Eleanor, this simple acknowledgement of her misjudgment was profound. "Thank you for that," I said quietly. "It matters to hear it." She nodded once, accepting my response. "I also want to thank you for Lily, for raising a young woman brave enough to speak truth to power, even when that power was her grandmother." A genuine smile briefly illuminated her face. "She reminds me of myself at that age, before I learned to silence certain parts of myself for the sake of propriety." "It's not too late, you know," I said impulsively, "to reclaim those parts of yourself." Eleanor's hand stilled on her knitting. "Perhaps not," she agreed thoughtfully, "though old habits are difficult to break. Worth breaking, though, I think. Lily adores the grandmother she's getting to know here, the one who teaches her about art history and builds studios and garden sheds, the one who sits on the floor with her grandchildren and lets her hair get messed up during morning swims." Eleanor actually laughed, a genuine sound free from her usual restraint. "Richard says much the same thing. He prefers Lake Eleanor to Oak Ridge Eleanor, as he puts it." She resumed her knitting, her expression thoughtful. "I've spent so many years maintaining appearances, creating the perfect surface. It becomes difficult to distinguish the mask from the face beneath it." "But not impossible," I suggested gently. "No," she agreed after a moment. "Not impossible." We fell into a comfortable silence as the sky darkened further and the first stars appeared over the lake. From the dock came the sound of laughter, splashing, Richard's deep voice calling everyone out of the water as the temperature dropped. I could pick out Lily's laugh among the others, uninhibited, joyful, belonging. "She's thriving here," Eleanor observed, following my gaze toward the dock where shadowy figures were now wrapping themselves in towels. "All of them are, but Lily especially. She's found her place." "Yes," I agreed, watching as my daughter helped Madison up the dock steps, both of them gesturing animatedly about something, though I think she's helped create that place as much as she's found it. "She's changed this family, Eleanor. For the better." Eleanor didn't disagree. She simply nodded, her eyes on the approaching group, something like contentment settling over her features. Perhaps we all needed to be changed. The remainder of our time at the lake unfolded with the same easy rhythm, each day bringing new connections, new understandings. Lily and the twins became inseparable. Their age difference transformed from obstacle to advantage as she took on the role of revered older cousin, teacher, and co-conspirator. Thomas relaxed into a version of himself I'd glimpsed only rarely, in Oak Ridge Heights, playful, spontaneous, free from the weight of professional expectations and family history. Even my relationship with Eleanor evolved, moving from cautious politeness to something approaching mutual respect and occasional genuine warmth. We would never be intimate confidants. Too much history stood between us, too many fundamental differences in how we viewed the world. But we had found common ground in our love for Thomas and Lily, in our appreciation for beauty and order, in our growing understanding of each other's strengths. On our final night at the lake, Richard built a massive bonfire on the beach, and the entire family gathered to watch the sunset give way to a star-filled sky. The twins, exhausted from a day of swimming and fort building, fell asleep leaning against Lily's shoulders, their faces still sticky with marshmallow residue. Charles and Diane sat close together, her pregnancy now showing slightly under her loose sundress. Catherine and her husband Paul tossed driftwood into the fire, arguing good-naturedly about the best technique for maintaining the perfect flame. I found myself between Thomas and Eleanor, the three of us wrapped in light blankets against the evening chill, watching Lily gently stroke Madison's hair as the child slept against her. "She'll make an excellent sister," Eleanor said softly, following my gaze. "She has a natural way with children." I glanced at her sharply, but saw only thoughtfulness in her expression, no hidden agenda or implied criticism of our family structure. "Yes, she does," I agreed carefully, "though she's pretty perfect as an only child, too." Eleanor nodded, accepting this without pushback. "Of course. I only meant it as a compliment to her nurturing nature." She hesitated, then added, "Though, if you and Thomas ever did decide to expand your family, you would make wonderful parents to another child. You already are." It was perhaps the most direct acknowledgement she had ever made of Thomas's role as Lily's father, not her stepfather or adoptive father, but simply her father. The distinction meant everything. "Thank you, Eleanor," I said quietly. "That means a lot, coming from you." She smiled slightly, her gaze returning to the fire. "I am capable of learning, Caroline, even at my age, even from my mistakes." Later, as we helped a sleepy Lily guide the twins back to the house, Thomas pulled me aside, letting the others go ahead. "What were you and my mother talking about by the fire?" he asked, his curiosity evident. "You both looked so serious." I smiled, linking my arm through his as we followed the sandy path back to the house. "The future, the past, family. That's cryptic. It's accurate," I countered. "We were finding common ground, I think." He shook his head in wonder. "I never thought I'd see the day. What changed her, do you think?" I considered the question as we walked, the stars brilliant above us, the sound of gentle waves lapping at the shore beside us. Lily changed her. Lily challenged everything Eleanor thought she knew about family, about belonging, about what makes someone a Montgomery. And Eleanor, to her credit, was brave enough to reconsider. Thomas squeezed my hand, and brave enough to admit when she was wrong. "That too," I agreed. Though I think what really changed was that she finally saw Lily, really saw her, not just the idea of her. And once you truly see someone, it's much harder to exclude them. We reached the porch where Eleanor stood waiting, framed in the golden light spilling from the windows. She had already helped the twins to bed, supervised teeth brushing, and performed whatever other grandmother duties were required. Now she held the door open for us, a simple gesture of welcome that somehow contained everything that had shifted over these 2 weeks. "It's getting cool," she said. "Come inside where it's warm." And we did, crossing the threshold together, a family redefined by truth, strengthened by challenge, expanded by love that transcended bloodlines and expectations and the narrow definitions that had once threatened to keep us apart. The transition from summer to fall in Oak Ridge Heights happened with theatrical precision, the maples along Main Street turning crimson exactly as September arrived, mornings suddenly crisp, garden parties giving way to gallery openings and fundraising galas. Our return from Lake Montgomery coincided with this seasonal shift, as if the world itself was acknowledging that something fundamental had changed within our family. Lily began her junior year at Westbrook Academy with a confidence I'd never seen before. Gone was the hesitant girl who second-guessed her clothing choices and rehearsed conversations in her head. In her place stood a young woman who moved through the school hallways with quiet assurance, her art portfolio always tucked under one arm, the Montgomery locket a constant presence around her neck, not as a bid for acceptance, but as a reminder of battles fought and won. "Harris invited me to join the student gallery committee," she announced over dinner one evening in late September, casually passing the salad bowl to Thomas. "It's mostly seniors, but he said my perspective would be valuable." Harris Whitmore was the notoriously selective head of Westbrook's visual arts department, a former museum curator whose approval was coveted by every art student in the school. That he had specifically sought out Lily was significant, a professional recognition of her talent beyond the polite encouragement most students received. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, noting how she accepted the news as something earned rather than an unexpected gift. "When do you start?" "Next week. We're planning the fall showcase." She speared a cherry tomato with her fork, her expression thoughtful. "I'm thinking of submitting my lake series, the studies of early morning light on water. Harris says colleges look for cohesive portfolios that demonstrate both technical skill and personal vision." Thomas looked up from his plate, surprise, crossing his features. "Colleges? Already? You've still got 2 years." Lily shrugged, but I could see the excitement she was attempting to contain. "The best art programs are competitive. Harris says I should start researching now, maybe visit a few campuses next summer to get a feel for the different approaches." She hesitated, then added, "Actually, Grandma Eleanor suggested the same thing. She's offered to take me to New York over winter break to tour Pratt and the visual arts program at NYU." Thomas and I exchanged glances, this new alliance between his mother and our daughter still occasionally startling us despite the changes we'd witnessed over the summer. "That's thoughtful of her," Thomas said carefully. "Though New York is a long way from Michigan." Lily's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that a problem? You went to Johns Hopkins for medical school. That's not exactly around the corner." "That was different. I was older and—" He stopped himself, registering the trap he'd nearly walked into. "You're right. Hypocritical of me to suggest you should stay close to home when I didn't." Lily's expression softened. "I'm just exploring options, Dad. I haven't decided anything. But I do want to see what's out there, beyond Oak Ridge Heights." I watched this exchange with a mixture of pride and wistfulness, noting how adeptly Lily had navigated a potential conflict, how maturely she was approaching her future. The little girl who once needed me to check under her bed for monsters was now calmly discussing college tours and career paths, her independence emerging not in defiant rebellion, but in thoughtful self-advocacy. Later that night, as Thomas and I prepared for bed, he brought up the college discussion again. "I sounded just like my father, didn't I?" he asked ruefully, hanging his shirt in the closet with characteristic precision. The moment she mentioned looking at schools far from home, all I could think was, too soon, too far, too dangerous. I smiled, applying moisturizer to my face in the bathroom mirror. A perfectly normal parental reaction. We've only just found our footing here, built this new family dynamic. It's natural to want to preserve it a little longer. Still, the irony isn't lost on me. He leaned against the doorframe, watching my nightly routine. All those years of my mother's controlling behavior, her insistence on keeping the family close, her resistance to change, and here I am, having the same knee-jerk reaction at the first mention of Lily spreading her wings. "There's a difference," I pointed out, turning to face him. "You caught yourself. You acknowledged her right to explore options." "That's not controlling, Thomas. That's just loving her and wanting her near, which is entirely different from manipulating her choices to suit your vision of what her life should be. He nodded, accepting this distinction. I suppose the true test will be how I handle it when she actually makes a decision, whether I support her choice, even if it takes her far from here. You will, I said with certainty, because you've seen firsthand what happens when parents prioritize their own comfort over their child's growth, and you're determined not to repeat that pattern. He pulled me close, pressing a kiss to my forehead. When did you get so wise, Caroline Bennett-Montgomery? Around the time I realized that raising a child means preparing her to leave you, I replied, resting my head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Even when every instinct tells you to hold on tighter. October brought Lily's first exhibition with the Student Gallery Committee, a showcase of work selected from Westbrook's top artists. Her lake studies were given prime placement on the main wall, the series of 5 watercolors progressing from dawn to midday, capturing the shifting quality of light on water with a sensitivity that belied her age and experience. Eleanor and Richard attended the opening, of course, but so did Charles and Diane with their twins, Catherine and Paul, and even several of Eleanor's friends from her various committees and boards, a Montgomery family turnout, typically reserved for graduation ceremonies or major sporting achievements, never before bestowed on an art exhibition. I watched Eleanor move through the gallery, introducing Lily to her friends not as Thomas's stepdaughter or even my granddaughter, but specifically as the artist of these remarkable watercolors. There was genuine pride in her voice, unmistakable and unqualified. Your daughter has extraordinary talent, Marianne Caldwell, the chair of the Oak Ridge Arts Council, commented to me as we both admired Lily's work. Eleanor tells me she's considering Pratt or RISD, very competitive programs. She's keeping her options open, I replied, still adjusting to this new reality where Eleanor actively promoted Lily's artistic ambitions. But yes, she's serious about pursuing art as a career. Marianne nodded approvingly. Smart girl, and with the Montgomery connections, doors will open. Eleanor has already mentioned her to several people on the board of the Michigan Arts Foundation. I felt a momentary flicker of ambivalence at this, pride that Eleanor was using her considerable influence to support Lily's dreams, discomfort at the reminder of how privilege operated in worlds like this, creating opportunities for some while remaining closed to others with equal talent but fewer connections. Later, as the event wound down and Lily was engaged in animated conversation with Harris Whitmore and several student committee members, Eleanor approached me near the refreshment table. She's made quite an impression, she observed, nodding toward Lily. Harris tells me she has the strongest portfolio he's seen in a decade of teaching here. She works incredibly hard, I acknowledged. Always has, even as a little girl. When she commits to something, she gives it everything. Eleanor smiled slightly. A Montgomery trait, though perhaps expressed more creatively than is typical, for our family. I raised an eyebrow at this. I thought artistic talent skipped a generation. Wasn't Richard's mother the last Montgomery artist? Until Lily, Eleanor agreed. Though I sometimes wonder if the talent didn't skip generations so much as it was. Discouraged in certain ones. Her expression grew distant, reflective. Different times, different expectations, particularly for women. She straightened, returning to her usual composure. In any case, I wanted to let you know that Richard and I have set up a trust for Lily's education. Specifically for her art education, wherever she chooses to pursue it. I blinked, caught off guard by this unexpected announcement. That's extremely generous, Eleanor, but not necessary. We've been saving for her college fund since she was born. I'm sure you have, she replied, her tone matter-of-fact rather than condescending. And that speaks to your dedication as parents. But the reality is that top art programs are expensive. Not just tuition, but specialized materials, study abroad opportunities, Professional-grade equipment. The trust will ensure she never has to compromise her artistic development due to financial constraints. There was something in her voice, not quite regret, but a certain wistfulness that made me wonder again about the young woman Eleanor had been, the art historian who had set aside her own professional ambitions for the role of faculty wife and Montgomery matriarch. "Thank you," I said simply, recognizing the gift for what it was, not just financial support, but Eleanor's acknowledgement of Lily's legitimate place in the family's future, her right to the same advantages any Montgomery by birth would receive. That means a great deal to her, to all of us. Eleanor nodded once, accepting my gratitude without further comment. Then, in a gesture still rare enough to surprise me, she briefly touched my arm, a small physical acknowledgement of our growing understanding. "She's done well here," Eleanor said, her gaze returning to Lily across the room. "Though I suspect she's already outgrowing Oak Ridge Heights. Some spirits need wider horizons to truly flourish." With that remarkably insightful observation, she moved away to join Richard, leaving me to ponder this evolving version of my mother-in-law. Still formal, still occasionally intimidating, but increasingly perceptive, and, most surprisingly, supportive of a future for Lily that might look very different from the traditional Montgomery path. November brought Thanksgiving, that most charged of family holidays, now carrying the additional weight of memories from Easter's confrontation. But this year, instead of the formal dining room with its rigid seating arrangements and unspoken hierarchies, Eleanor surprised everyone by suggesting a completely different approach. "I thought perhaps we might do something more casual this year," she announced during one of her regular Sunday calls with Lily. "A potluck at the house, with everyone contributing a dish that means something to them. A new tradition, you might say." And so Thanksgiving found us in Eleanor's kitchen, not relegated to minor tasks under her supervision as in years past, but actively collaborating in a space she had previously guarded like a private domain. Lily and the twins decorated handmade place cards for the table, which had been moved into the sunroom to accommodate everyone more comfortably. Catherine brought her famous cranberry chutney, Charles and Diane arrived with sweet potato casserole, and Thomas prepared his grandfather's oyster stuffing from a recipe card so old and stained it was barely legible. I contributed my mother's pecan pie, the recipe she had brought north from her Alabama childhood, scrawled in her flowing handwriting in the cookbook she'd given me when I left for college. It was the one family tradition I had to offer, my own, history being considerably less documented than the Montgomerys' extensive archives and heirloom recipes. "Mom made this every Thanksgiving," I explained as I placed the pie on the dessert table. "She said the secret was using twice the bourbon. The recipe called for—" Eleanor raised an eyebrow at this, but there was humor in her expression rather than judgment. "Your mother sounds like she would have gotten along well with Richard's Aunt Josephine. She believed most family gatherings were improved by liberal applications of bourbon." It was a small moment of connection, this acknowledgement of my family. History, however modest, compared to the Montgomery lineage. But it mattered. Another shift in how Eleanor perceived me. Not as an interloper who had somehow captured her son, but as a woman with my own background and traditions worthy of incorporation into their family tapestry. When we finally sat down to dinner, I noticed that the formal Wedgwood china had been replaced by a mismatched collection of plates, some clearly antique, others more modern, each with its own story. "These were my grandmother's wedding china," Eleanor explained, noting my observation. "And those blue ones were from Richard's mother's everyday set. The floral pattern was what Richard and I used when we were first married, living in that tiny apartment near campus." Lily ran her fingers along the rim of her plate, a delicate pattern of silver leaves on white porcelain. "And these? Those were a gift from my art history professor at Michigan," Eleanor said, something softening in her expression at the memory. "She said everyone should eat from beautiful things, that it elevated the ordinary into something meaningful." She glanced around the table, taking in the eclectic mix of dishes. the handmade place cards, the centerpiece of fall leaves and pine cones the twins had collected from the yard. "I think she would approve of this table. It has character." It was perhaps the highest compliment Eleanor Montgomery had ever paid to something that didn't conform to her usual standards of formal elegance. And it set the tone for the meal that followed. Relaxed, warm, punctuated by laughter and overlapping conversations, rather than the carefully modulated discussions of previous family gatherings. After dinner, as the adults lingered over coffee, and the twins convinced Lily to help them build a fort in the living room using sofa cushions and throw blankets, I found myself alone with Eleanor in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher in companionable silence. "Thank you," I said finally, handing her a serving platter to wrap for leftovers. "For today. For everything, really. These past months have been transformative." Eleanor accepted the platter, her movements efficient as she covered it with foil. "I should be thanking you, Caroline, and Lily, for your patience, for giving me the opportunity to rectify certain mistakes." She placed the leftovers in the refrigerator, then turned to face me fully, her posture straight as always, but her expression unusually open. "I've been thinking a great deal about family lately. What makes one? What sustains it? What threatens it? For too long, I believed blood was the defining factor, the only real basis for connection and obligation." I leaned against the counter, giving her my full attention, sensing the importance of whatever she was trying to express. "But I was wrong," she continued, her voice steady despite the difficulty such admissions clearly posed for her. "Family is built through choice, through consistent care, through showing up when it matters, through love." She smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her linen napkin, a gesture so characteristic it made me smile despite the seriousness of the conversation. "You and Lily taught me that, though it took me far too long to learn." "Better late than never," I offered gently. She nodded, acknowledging the grace in this response. "Indeed. And now I find myself with an extraordinary granddaughter who challenges every preconception I held, who sees the world with an artist's clarity and courage, who, despite my initial resistance, has become one of the greatest joys in my life." The words hung between us, remarkable not just for their content, but for the emotion behind them. Eleanor Montgomery, who had built her identity around restraint and propriety, allowing herself this unguarded moment of honesty. "She feels the same way about you," I said after a moment. "The relationship you're building means everything to her." Eleanor's smile was small, but genuine. "She is a remarkable young woman. You've raised her well, Caroline, with strength and sensitivity in equal measure. I hope you know that I recognize that now, even if I was slow to acknowledge it." Before I could respond, the kitchen door swung open and Lily appeared, slightly breathless, her dark curls escaping from their careful arrangement. "Grandma, the twins want to know if you still have the photo albums from when Dad was little. They don't believe he ever climbed trees or got dirty." Eleanor laughed, an unguarded sound still rare enough to be surprising. "In the library, bottom shelf of the mahogany bookcase. The blue albums cover ages 5 through 10, which I believe were Thomas's most adventurous years." As Lily turned to go, Eleanor added, "And Lily? There's a smaller album, bound in green leather, on the shelf above. Those are from my first year at university when I was studying art history. You might find them interesting." Lily's eyes widened slightly at this unexpected offering, access to Eleanor's personal history, her life before she became the Montgomery matriarch. "I'd love to see those. Thank you." After she left, Eleanor turned back to me, a hint of vulnerability in her expression. "I've never shown those to anyone in the family, not even Thomas. They're from before, when I was someone else entirely." I understood immediately the significance of this, Eleanor opening a door not just to her past, but to the self she had set aside. the young woman with ambitions and passions beyond the role she eventually assumed. "She'll treasure that," I assured her, "the chance to know that part of you." Eleanor nodded, resuming her kitchen tasks with characteristic efficiency. Perhaps it's time someone did, before those memories fade completely. The day after Thanksgiving, traditionally dedicated to elaborate Christmas decorating in the Montgomery household, brought another unexpected shift. Rather than the usual formal transformation of the house, identical wreaths on all windows, color-coordinated ornaments on the precisely trimmed tree, Eleanor announced a different approach. "I thought we might do something special this year," she told Lily over breakfast, served informally in the kitchen rather than the dining room. The attic contains several boxes of ornaments from various family members over the generations, some quite old, others more eclectic. I thought, "You might help me sort through them, perhaps create a more personal tree this year." Lily's face lit up at this invitation, not just to participate in the decorating, but to engage with family history, to help curate a visual representation of the Montgomery legacy that would now include her. I watched from the doorway as grandmother and granddaughter disappeared into the attic, emerging hours later dusty and laughing, carrying boxes of treasures accumulated over decades. Hand-blown glass ornaments from Germany, delicate paper stars made by Thomas in elementary school, carved wooden figures from Richard's childhood home in Vermont. "Look at this," Lily exclaimed, holding up a small clay sculpture, clearly handmade, painted in fading colors. "Dad made this in 2nd grade. It's supposed to be a reindeer, but it looks more like a very confused dog." Eleanor smiled, handling the misshapen creature with surprising tenderness. He was so proud of it. Insisted it had to go on the front of the tree where everyone could admire it. Richard's mother was visiting that Christmas. She had very definite ideas about proper holiday decor. Her expression when she saw that prominently displayed was memorable. "What did she say?" Lily asked, carefully rewrapping the ornament. "Nothing directly, but she gave me a book on traditional Christmas decorating for my birthday the following March." Eleanor's eyes twinkled with unexpected mischief. "I made sure that reindeer had an even more prominent position the next year." This glimpse of Eleanor's quiet rebellion delighted Lily, creating yet another connection between them, a shared appreciation for small acts of defiance within the confines of propriety. The tree that emerged from their collaboration was unlike any I'd seen in the Montgomery home, eclectic, personal, full of stories and memories rather than coordinated perfection. When Thomas arrived that evening after his hospital shift, he stopped short in the doorway of the living room, staring at the transformation. Is that the angel from Grandma Montgomery's tree?" he asked, pointing to the slightly tarnished silver figure atop the spruce. "I haven't seen that since I was a child," Eleanor nodded, adjusting a strand of antique glass beads. Lily found it in one of the older boxes. She thought it deserved to be displayed again. Thomas moved closer to the tree, touching a faded red ball with obvious recognition. "And this was from our tree the year I broke my arm falling out of the oak tree. You saved it even though the paint is chipped." "Of course I did," Eleanor replied simply. "It's part of our history." Our history. The phrase lingered in the air, its significance not lost on any of us. Not just the Montgomery history now, but ours. A shared narrative that included Lily and me, that acknowledged the value of imperfection, of experiences both difficult and joyful that had shaped us into the family we were becoming. As December progressed, bringing with it the usual flurry of holiday events and traditions, I noticed other subtle changes in how Eleanor approached family gatherings. The annual Montgomery Christmas party, typically a formal affair with catered food and hired servers, became a more intimate gathering with family recipes prepared by Eleanor herself, with Lily's assistance. The strictly timed gift exchange on Christmas morning gave way to a more relaxed unwrapping, punctuated by stories and shared memories associated with various presents. Most significantly, when Eleanor's oldest friend Margaret commented on how kind it was of Thomas to have adopted Caroline's girl, Eleanor's response was immediate and unequivocal. "Lily is our granddaughter," she said firmly, her voice carrying clearly across the living room. Not by accident of birth, but by something far more meaningful, by choice and love and shared history, by being exactly who she is, which is extraordinary. The room fell momentarily silent, Margaret's expression registering surprise at this uncharacteristic assertion from her typically reserved friend. Then Richard raised his glass in a quiet toast. "To Lily," he said simply. "Who taught us all what family truly means?" As glasses were raised around the room, I caught Lily's eye across the space between us. The girl who had once stood trembling at Eleanor's Easter dinner table, gathering her courage to speak her truth, now accepted this acknowledgement with quiet confidence, not desperately grateful for inclusion, but rightfully receiving the recognition she had earned through her own strength and integrity. Later that night, after guests had departed and the house settled into peaceful silence, I found Lily in the library, curled in the window seat with one of Eleanor's art history books open on her lap, the lights of the Christmas tree reflecting in the glass beside her. "Happy?" I asked softly, joining her on the cushioned seat. She smiled, closing the book with a finger marking her place. "Yes, it doesn't feel strained anymore. Like I'm an outsider they're making room for. It just feels like family." "That's because it is," I replied, brushing a curl from her forehead in a gesture that had remained the same since her childhood, even as everything else had transformed around us. "You created that, Lily, with your courage that day at Easter, your refusal to accept less than you deserved." She leaned against me, 16 years old, but still my little girl in moments like these. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us. You, standing with me, Dad finally speaking up, even Grandma Eleanor being willing to change." "True," I acknowledged. "But it started with you, with your voice." From the doorway, Eleanor's voice surprised us both. "Lily is right. It took all of us." She moved into the library, elegant even in her casual evening attire. Though I suspect we all needed her example to find our own courage. She sat in the leather armchair across from our window seat, the lamplight softening the lines of her face. "I've been thinking about what you said that day, Lily, about trying so hard to belong. I want you to know that you never need to try again, not in this family. You belong here exactly as you are." Lily nodded, accepting this declaration with the gravity it deserved. "I know that now, and I'm grateful." "As are we," Eleanor replied, "for the gift you've given this family, the chance to become something better than we were." Outside, the window, snow began to fall, large flakes drifting past the glass to accumulate on the perfectly maintained grounds of the Montgomery estate. But inside, in the warm circle of lamplight, something else was accumulating. Understanding, acceptance, love without conditions or qualifications. A family redefined not by blood or tradition or social expectation, but by the simple, profound truth of belonging. And it had all begun with a young girl finding the courage to speak, to claim her place at the table, to change everything with the power of her voice and the strength of her spirit. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories. Right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.